All right. Well, hello everyone. And today we have something very special, which is I am confronted by the two people whose name I shamelessly have ripped off for my YouTube channel. And that is Jordan and Nikki from iWizard. Um, Jordan and I, if you guys followed, I posted about this. We read Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correa together recently and had so much fun. We figured twice the wizards, twice the fun, and picked a book that I think all three of us had been meaning to read at least at some
Mhm.
point. And that was The Anubis Gates by Tim Powers. So before we get into talking Tim Powers and what this book was about and what we thought about it, I'll just let the two of you lovely people introduce yourselves.
Well, thanks for having us, Sam. So, as you said, I'm Nikki from iWizard, and this is my third Tim Powers read. So, I had a little bit of a sense of what to expect,
Oh
maybe
yeah,
more
so
so
you
than
read
Jordan.
you read Stress of Her Regard, and then you read one of his more modern ones,
Yeah,
right?
alternate routes.
Okay. How was Alternate Routes, by the way, real
It was
quick?
fun. Yeah,
It
that would
was
be one
fun.
that. Yeah, it would be one that I think you would like, maybe more. It has a little bit more of a like kind of secret agenty feel, special ops type of feel,
Yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah,
like
so I'm Jordan.
little
I'm
X Files.
Nikki's husband, and excited to be here, Sam. So thanks for having us on.
Yeah, no, and Jordan, is this your first Tim Powers novel, or have you read him before?
Yeah, this is my first Tim Powers book. Christopher Rocchio has been getting on me for years now to read Tim Powers. Nikki's been bothering me for years to read Tim Powers. She thinks I will. She still thinks, even after reading Anubis Gates and knowing how I feel about it, she still thinks that I will like Stress of Her Regard and like it more.
Mm.
And she seems to think that because I'm a big fan of the paranormal fiction and Men in Black and this sort of thing that I would like the one of his newer ones that she read. So yeah, this is my first foray into Tim Powers. I'm sure I'll dip back in again if what you guys say is true. But yeah,
All right. Well, I'll just in people watching this probably know my experience, but I'll say it briefly. Give a brief synopsis about what this is about, and then we'll get into some opening thoughts here. So this is my first or my fourth full novel by Powers. Started with because of Christopher. Started with Stress of Her Regard, and then also went through Alternate Routes. So that's kind of coincidental there.
That's
And
funny.
then went on to My Brother's Keeper, which is another one of his more recent ones. That's about the Bronte family
Oh, fun.
being sort of attacked by a werewolf cult from almost inside the family. So there's some there's werewolves in this book. There's some more traditional
Wasn't
ghosts and werewolves in that
didn't their
one.
deaths have something to do with drinking graveyard water or something?
Oh, yep. There's stuff about the
Yeah.
graveyard and the graveyard water in that book. Yeah. And then I also read about half of On Stranger Tides, but kind of timed that really badly, so I put it down and need to come back to it. So Anubis Gates is very weird compared. We can put a period there. I don't need to finish that sentence. Anubis Gates is very weird, but Powers is like a weird fiction author to begin with. But the Anubis Gates is especially weird in terms of his bibliography because it's not just a straightforward, um, like secret history novel, which is a lot of what he tends to write. So, like with the Brontes I mentioned, his shtick a lot of the time is he writes about a historical time and place, writes about historical people in it, and then will fill in the gaps of the unknown with like the supernatural, horror, sci-fi, what have you. And the Anubis Gates is just straight up a time travel novel that doesn't have a whole lot to do with Egypt. So it's very different from his normal fare. And I guess I'll say it is simultaneously, in terms of my experience with it, um, the most fun I've had reading a Tim Powers novel, probably, but also probably the least deep of his books, where it's almost like all action, all fun, and not a whole lot of like real like meat to sink your teeth into. Um, I guess to give a brief description, and you guys can correct me if I get any of these details wrong, because I think you've read it a little bit more recently than I did. But because of the rise of largely Christianity, but also the British Empire, the book opens with these Egyptian sorcerers that have been greatly damaged in terms of the power that they use because of this. And so, in retaliation, they look to summon an Egyptian god, Anubis, which, in other words, a demon. And so part of their spell of summoning this god and my recollection is that they're trying to have the god possess one of the sorcerers. Is they're looking to use a spell to open up these gates. Think Anubis being the god of the gates of the underworld. So they're trying to open up these gates to let the god Anubis come through. It doesn't work exactly. Things don't go as they would expect, and the spell creates big rips through time, through which people can travel if they know how. And the main sorcerer who tried to summon Anubis for him to possess him, he gets cursed and becomes, we'll call him a supernatural oddity, and also a serial killer through time, sort of an eternal serial killer almost. And so most of the novel begins with a romantic history professor named Doyle, who gets hired on by this billionaire who's discovered these rips in time. And they say, hey, we're going to go back to the time of the Romantic poets because we found another opening there that we can go back through. And we want you to sort of lead it's almost like Jurassic Park, but time travel. It's like we're going to lead a tourist group back sort of as a novelty to witness Coleridge give a speech.
That's even more similar to Ray Bradbury's The Sound of Thunder, which is you take modern day tourists back in time to go hunt a dinosaur.
Hey, yeah, there you go.
His story is more about not altering the past in any way. And so they like build these bridges so that you don't touch the ground when you're hunting the dinosaurs, and they only kill dinosaurs that they know are going to die and stuff like that. So actually, that was one of the comparisons that I made initially, which is you get these rich people going back in time, time travel tourism or whatever.
Sure.
Yeah, he did say that.
Yeah, and so Doyle, the literature professor, things go wrong. He gets left there, and it's sort of about him surviving and making his way on an adventure. This is like, the way I would describe this is it's like, I don't know, Indiana Jones time travel meets Oliver Twist or something like that. So yeah, anyway, I gave that's briefly what it's about. I think I said this before we went live. I don't know if I said this after we went live here. We're going to talk non-spoiler for a little while and kind of give initial thoughts. So anyone who has not read the Anubis Gates can stick around for that. And then we'll go into full spoilers. But Nikki, in terms of like a non-spoiler, since you haven't been here before, we'll say ladies first. What did you think about the Anubis Gates?
So I have a lot of fun reading Tim Powers and had a sense of what I was getting into. It was a lot more action, as you said, than his books usually are. There's usually more depth. I was still, like, even having read him, expecting there to be a little more interaction between Doyle and the Romantic poets, since he is writing a biography of the fictional poet William Ashbless. I'm like, I kept like expecting him to be able to like meet his hero and, interact with him. Like, that's what I expected from the beginning. And so it was, most of the book I found very uncomfortable. Like, there were very few moments when like there's any kind of relaxation or downtime or like light conversation. He's constantly on the run. And Jordan had mentioned this kind of like fugitive style on the run. There's always someone after him. But I always do feel like I learn a lot reading Tim Powers. And it's always fun piecing together the puzzle pieces, the little breadcrumbs that he leaves, and trying to predict what's going to happen, because he does tend to leave like enough little hints for you to make those inducive jumps. And once I got to the end of the book, and I know he dropped in Dante's Inferno a couple times, I'm wondering, 'cause I haven't read Dante's Inferno. I don't know if you have, Sam, but yeah, I'm wondering if this was supposed to be Dante's Inferno, because like Doyle's
Hmm.
experience was so hellish the whole time. It was
Hmm.
like we were supposed to be uncomfortable. Like, I'm wondering if that's what Tim Powers was going for.
That's very, very interesting. Okay, okay. Jordan, I'm assuming you had an equally positive experience. I heard this is going to be your book of the year. 5 out of 5 stars. Tell us how much you loved the Anubis Gates, Jordan.
I love Nikki's eternal optimism. I even love, Nikki, the fact, I love this about you, that you'll even find a way to apply cognitive distortions to make yourself like the book. You'll be like, actually, if you, it's like, postmodernists who go to an art museum and they're like, the reason this is ugly is that it's intentionally ugly because it's meant to reflect the ugliness within the human spirit. So you're like, the reason this was a miserable and torturous novel to read is because it was supposed to be. It's this deeper intellectual project that Powers is engaging in. No, I should just start by saying a couple of nice things about it. There were some things that I liked throughout. I can tell that I like Tim Powers. I can tell from reading this that I would get along with him. I can tell from reading this that there are probably other of his books that I would enjoy. He clearly has the soul of a true scholar. He cares about details. His books are like speculative fiction for intellectual history nerds, which I am an intellectual history nerd. He Powers understands, I guess, the type of person, and I think much like his character Doyle, Powers understands the type of person who's curious, who is there's a poem that's cited throughout, which is probably my favorite poem, which is Tennyson's Ulysses. And Tennyson's Ulysses, that's quoted especially in the epilogue and all throughout the book, is about this guy. Well, it's about Odysseus from the Odyssey, and Tennyson's poem is about what life for Odysseus is like. Well, the Roman name Ulysses, what it's like after he returns to Ithaca and things have gotten boring again. And after being out on the wine dark seas for 20 years, battling the Laestrygones and bedding like goddesses and doing all this stuff, he has to sit, what does he call it, by his still hearth with his with these barren crags, matched with an aged wife. And he just doesn't understand his island anymore. If you remember in the Odyssey, like all the fighting age men went off to Troy and died. And so he's just sitting here ruling over these young people that he doesn't understand. And I definitely made some connections there. But one of the famous lines from that poem is that he yearns to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. And so he's thirsty for new experiences and knowledge. And I think Tim Powers is that guy, and he understands that. And so Doyle is someone, who knows where Samuel Taylor Coleridge went to dinner after the seance he went to or whatever. So I just like the fact that Tim Powers has the soul of a scholar. His characters are scholarly. They're drinking brandy over the journals of Samuel Taylor Coleridge as they're going to people's houses and they're seeing like a rare book on their shelf and they're like, oh my God, how did you find that? So I liked the intellectual history of it all. I think it had the potential to be a fun book. A time traveling, poetry scholar / professor who loves the Romantic poets. I love the Romantic poets, especially the older Romantic poets, Wordsworth, Coleridge, Blake, Burns, that kind of thing. And I like the intellectual ages that Powers brought us to. I like the 1980s, so you get some of that. You get to go back to 1810. I like that. You get to go back to 1660 or the 1660s. I like that period, right? Because
I think it was
that's the period.
1680s.
What's
I
that?
think it was 1684.
I thought they went back to the 1660s as well, because they were going back to Milton's time, and
They were talking about that.
oh, okay, no, and it was the 1680s, is what you're saying. Okay, yeah, I like that whole era. Milton was alive then too.
Mm.
I like that whole era. And I like the plots that they were talking about and some of the intellectual history and that sort of thing. So I'll stay positive for now and just say that I like. I'll mention one last thing that I liked. I like the element of the stuff he does with time travel, playing with time travel. You get the predestination paradox, right? So Doyle's actions in the past, which are a result of time travel, are also what caused the time travel to be possible in the first place. So you get this cool intellectualizing with this closed loop where the events are both the cause and the effect of each other, and you're both a witness to history and a scholar of history, but you're also an active participant in history, shaping it, but also ensuring that the past remains unchanged. And there, well, I could go on about that in the spoiler section because there's a really cool thing with Ashbless that I won't talk about now, and Doyle that I'll talk about later, that has to do with something really profound that Powers does that I don't think anyone's ever done better before, just in terms of this one idea being novelized that I think is just really cool. So I'll stop there. That's a network of observations, of positive observations, Sam.
I was gonna say that sounds like a 5 out of 5 reading experience.
I want to try to be a little positive. I don't like it. Nikki knows I didn't like it, and I'll share some of that. But I thought I would start out positive.
Hey, there you go. I think for me, so a couple things. One, we talked about this isn't Powers' normal fare as far as like pacing goes. Like The Stress of Her Regard is a big, like it's a bigger novel for one, and it is sprawling and it covers years of history, and it's written almost as like a pastiche of a book like Frankenstein or Dracula. So it's written in a similar style, and so there's characters who will meander and go off on these side tangents, and you'll travel with like Byron and Shelley for pages and pages and pages through the countryside of Europe. And so it's paced very, very differently from this one. And obviously these two novels get compared a lot because they're both about the Romantic poets. But the Anubis Gates, Byron and Coleridge are side characters as being charitable. They're barely in the novel at all, whereas Lord Byron is arguably the secondary main character of Stress of Her Regard. So if that's more of what you're looking for, you'll get something a little bit different there. I mentioned before, like, Powers being a weird fiction author. I really like. I found that this is like one of my favorite like subgenres in fantasy, where it's like it's not sci-fi, it's not fantasy, it's not horror, it's kind of all three at once. So Lovecraft is a famous example of that, and I felt like there was a lot of. I don't know if you guys how much of Lovecraft you've read, but I felt like there was a good bit of like Lovecraft influence here, especially with the serial killer werewolf that we talked about, or that I mentioned before. Some of the things with some of the wizards, some of the sorcerers, like the dungeon underground elements like that, where there's not necessarily a clear spelled out explanation for it, but there's just enough given where you can have a magical explanation or a scientific explanation. Some of the things with the earth and their relationship with that, I thought was really interesting. I don't. Do you guys see this as more of like a sci-fi novel or a fantasy novel? How, like, what struck you more about it as far as what Powers is playing with here?
I think it started out as strong sci-fi, the way it was set up, because they actually go into like the quantum mechanics and trying to explain how traveling back in time works. And he uses who was it? Darrow uses the metaphor that it's like time is like a stream, right? It runs in one direction, of course, but there's an ice rind over the stream.
Mhm.
And if you punch holes, you can climb out of the time stream and run upstream on the ice and then enter time again through one of those holes. And those are the Anubis gates. And so in the 1980s, which would have been modern time in this book from when it was written, Darrow and his scientists have figured out how to use these Anubis gates, that they exist. And they did all these mathematical and scientific calculations to do it, right? But then once we get later on in the book, there's a lot more magic to it.
Mhm.
And it kind of becomes unbelievable that someone in 1810 can calculate where these gates are. So there's like some magical element to that to help them figure it out. So I think it gets into more fantasy as it goes on, but definitely by the end, there are strong horror elements, really strong. So I think it evolves over the course of the book.
Yeah, I think that probably a lot of people are calling this sci-fi.
Mhm.
I think that's just the classification or categorization difficulty that we have. We're trying to fit a square peg into a round hole or something like that, because there are only so many subgenres and things like that. I also think it has to do with Tim Powers' background as a writer of like steampunk and that
Mhm.
sort of thing, that people are looking at this and saying that it's sci-fi. Of course, it's got the time travel element in it. You guys were talking about this earlier, and I thought this book was going to be what the Mummy meets a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court meets Bruce Duffy's The World as I Found It, which is like an intellectual novel about philosophers and big ideas and stuff like that. You've read it, right, Nikki? You read that one, right?
Yeah. And to be fair, like our copy of the book looks very much like it's going to be more like the Mummy, like Jordan was looking for.
Yeah,
the
that's
cover
what I wanted.
does not show what it's like.
Yeah, that's what I wanted it to be. But it ended up being like The Fugitive with Harrison Ford, or maybe the older show, The Fugitive, meets the last 5 minutes of every Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode, like the part where everyone's fighting and all hell is breaking loose, and stuff that you kind of you can't suspend your disbelief for is coming out, but only really quickly and once per episode. That's happening the whole book long. It's just total chaos. And then maybe like add in, you said earlier, Oliver Twist. I was thinking the whole time I read it, just of it being even weirder than that, of it being like all the parts with Pris and Batty and JF Sebastian in Blade Runner, the film, just these weird like like homeless people and sort of devil's rejects. You guys were talking about the time travel thing, and I think Nikki understood this better than I did, because she's a physics person, and she teaches science for a living. And I don't know about you, Nikki and Sam, but I kind of thought the way that the time travel actually happened in this book was, I don't know, I was expecting something better. It was extremely hand wavy and kind of weak sauce, in my opinion. The tent and the stone and the radiation. I don't know. I was expecting like a time machine, and I was expecting like you mentioned Jurassic Park. It does have a lot of similarities with that. I was expecting at least an attempt to explain it in a way that was more robust, but I didn't get that.
And I tried to protect Tim Powers by, Jordan was complaining about this at the beginning of the book. He's like, I wanted to see what the time machine looked like. I wanted to see how this works. I'm like, but you're getting Doyle's perspective, and you're getting what he's seeing and what he understands. And so you're not going to be able to see whatever the device is or get a deep knowledge of it other than like what Brenner explains to him. And so, yeah, it's okay.
It is very like, and it works and they're back in time now. So it's definitely not hard sci-fi in the sense of like, and we're gonna go into like, all of the minutia of how this
No,
works.
you're right. That's
Um,
not his bag anyways. But I didn't like that it was like a field and a tent and then like a stone that you strap to your arm and then like radiation.
mhm.
Honestly, Sam, let's go do it. Let's go find a field somewhere. We'll meet in the middle of where we live. We'll find a big field and we'll get like a party tent and let's see if we can just like, let's just do it.
You gotta
Zap
Yeah.
calculate,
ourselves
make
with
sure it's an Anubis
radiation.
gate first.
Oh,
Yeah.
got to make sure it's an Anubis gate first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the hand waviness is a little bit, but
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess we'll get into spoilers here then in just a second. But I guess I'd ask this: who? Because Jordan, we talked about this a very little bit just over messaging. Who do you think would like this book? Like this book, in terms of Tim Powers' bibliography, is his most famous, which is odd because it's very different from the other Powers books that I've read. So it's like, really, this is the one. But this is his most famous book from what I can tell. So who do you think it would work for? Because the other weird thing, and I'll just mention this because you brought it up a second ago, Nikki, is that the title and the marketing for it is a little bit deceiving. If you're expecting this to be an Egypt heavy book, which all of the covers do, we've got Anubis and we've got, hieroglyphics everywhere. Egypt is in this book for like 10%, 5%, maybe. Like this is very much of like a novel about England in the
Yeah.
time period of the
I was
Romantics.
very surprised when it started in London. I'm like,
Yeah,
these gypsies are in London? Huh.
Yeah.
Okay.
so very
Yeah.
little Egypt in this. So in terms of if you had to recommend this to somebody, like who do you think would like this and who do you think wouldn't?
it's challenging. It's really challenging, and I think in some ways this is the problem for Tim Powers. There are people like me, guys like me, and the reason that I was attracted to this book, when you mentioned it, Sam, I jumped right on it. We were both going to make lists and narrow it down. You said Anubis Gates, and I said I'm doing it. I'm doing it because my friends and the people I look up to enjoy Tim Powers' work, and Tim Powers has all these same intellectual influences that I do. It helps that I like the sort of Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones, Stargate, God's Grave Scholars, all this kind of thing. I like that sort of thing. And but it had none of that for me. So it was extremely light on the actual intellectual history. I love the Romantic poets. I love that period. I wouldn't consider myself a quote unquote romantic in the mold of someone like Shelley or Keats or Byron or something like that. But I think it's just such much like in the same way that I like the existentialists. I like the Romantics because it's such a fecund period for intellectual ideas, and it changed the way that we see the world. It really was a paradigm shift, the Romantic period. And so I was expecting more of that heady discourse, more intellectual history, more of Byron and Coleridge, more of their lectures, the seances, the opium. I was expecting that sort of rich milieu, and I didn't get it. So the intellectual history buff over here was let down at that. The Tomb Raider, Indiana Jones guy was let down, that there wasn't more of that. And if I'm going to be honest, just to answer your question straightforwardly, is I think that people who like action-packed, pew pew fantasy and sci-fi kind of thing, people who like sword and sorcery, people who like military sci-fi, people who are easily titillated by, oh, look, he's going over there, and now he's hanging onto this thing, and now he's pulling this chain and killing this guy, and now this guy's jumping inside of the body of this guy and hollowing him out, and oh, look, there's a giant lizard. Now there's a skinwalking werewolf, and look over there's a dancing ape creature, and look with the clown, and he's on stilts, and look, they're fighting again, and there's another explosion, and now there's a boat chase, and actually the whole book is a chase. I think if you're like into just if you want to sit there and read a 400-page book about people chasing each other, I think that that this book is for you. And I think there are actually, I'm being facetious, definitely, but There are a lot of people out there who like that. And like these are the people who would not like Nikki in my book. Uh, and again, it's a free country and it's a diverse world of people with lots of different opinions and ideas. And I'm glad that books like these are there for them. So I would say it's for people who like fighting and action and a little bit of intellectual, patina icing on top.
Tina. That's a good way to put it.
But just know that it's going to be mostly pound cake underneath. But there's a little bit of intellectual icing on top. And, I think it's for those people. Sorry, go ahead.
So
what do you think, Nikki?
As Jordan mentioned, it's the only thing romantic about this book is the period that it takes place. Like if you're looking for some romantic adventure that you can just like relax into and enjoy the ride, this is not that book. If you're okay with being really uncomfortable, like Jordan mentioned, the devil's rejects in this book. If you have a strong stomach and you're like okay with like body parts falling off like all the time basically, and just like being in like, so the main character is Doyle, and when you're Doyle, you just feel like he has no control over anything. It is utter chaos. And if you're okay when you're reading just being totally out of control and going along for the ride, like this would be good. And also all the plot threads do come together at the end. So if you're someone who likes to make predictions as you read, and then you're driven forward by action,
come together like plot threads that I'm like, really, we're tying this up, like everything has a bow on it. Everything.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you like that, then this is for you too.
Yeah, my wife here is this book could be for like more Asperger's-y people, and I'm not even like that's not like I'm not making fun of anyone. I'm serious about that. And if you have a brain, I wanted to remind myself to tell you this. There are certain books that are for certain people with a certain type of brain. This worked, I think, really well for Nikki because she is someone who loves puzzles. She loves solving puzzles. She spends all day doing puzzles. She wakes up in the morning and she eats breakfast. And while she's eating breakfast, she's doing puzzles. And, sometimes I'll be watching a movie, relaxing. She'll be doing a puzzle next to me. She has to be solving a puzzle at all times. And she predicted everything in this book. To be fair,
I don't spend all day doing puzzles.
Okay.
Unless you count writing our book as a puzzle.
We right-brained people. That was hyperbole. Figurative language, honey. Yes, Nikki was solving the puzzle, and she was finding that to be immensely satisfying. And she predicted like everything. I mean, everything. And she said it way before it happened. And she does that when we're watching movies, too. She likes the puzzle aspect of it. And while I'm rolling my eyes about how every character is like everyone else and is jumping into each other's bodies, and while I was, rolling my eyes at,
that's not a weird that phrase could be taken multiple ways. It's sci-fi stuff, guys, just to be clear, in case viewers are confused by what that means. Read the book, you'll find out.
Yeah, I was rolling my eyes at the monstrous hybrids and the Ka replicas and the charms and the everyone is everyone else all the time. Nikki was in there trying to figure out who was who and actually participating in the kind of puzzle. And she was very much enjoying it in a way that I wasn't.
So as much as there's a couple things. As much as I like Jordan, there's a couple things I'll push back on. And the first is he said he's not, he's not a romantic in that sense. And Jordan, we all know you have a shirt saying, "What would Byron do?" So like we all know that. No. In all seriousness,
it would be Wordsworth. What would Wordsworth do?
What would Wordsworth? Yeah. Byron's not your hero? I thought like the drinking and partying, like
no, the zoo animals.
I'm the one that really likes Byron and named one of our cats Byron.
Well, one of my cats is named Byron. Yes. That's a Nikki influence. No, the zoo animals and the just fighting and dying in random wars that have nothing to do with you, and licentiousness and just absolute sexual degeneracy of his lifestyle. Yeah.
Not a role model.
He called one woman who met him called him mad, bad, and dangerous to know. The sort of the first rock star in history. No, I'm more of a Wordsworthian sort of person. Yeah, he's one of my heroes.
So it sounds like from what Jordan is saying that maybe Stress of Her Regard is a better fit for him. But I guess I'll say this in terms of who I would recommend this to. The first one that comes to mind, the first thing that came to mind as I got towards the end of this, and I can't really say why until we get into the spoiler section, but I think that this is, if Gene Wolfe fans, I'm a big fan of Wolfe, are looking to start reading Tim Powers, this is not a bad place to do it. Because when you're reading the Book of the New Sun, especially from Wolfe, there is almost that chaotic energy too of we're trying to figure out what's going on and where we are. And there's a very specific sci-fi gimmick that Powers does about 2/3 of the way through this novel that is creepily similar to what Wolfe is doing in Book of the New Sun as well. Now, they're very different novels, but the other thing about them that I'd compare them to is both Wolfe and Powers are very deeply like symbolic writers, like symbolism and layers of meaning behind like everything being very intentional is really important to them. Honestly, I would say, I don't know, you could make an argument that Tim Powers is even more so than Wolfe. So that's this is a one place as we get into spoilers. So we'll spoiler warning for everyone here. This is the one place where I would push back on Jordan a little bit in actuality, is I think there's a lot of really interesting symbolism that Powers plays with in this book that really worked well for me, and I found very interesting. Now, once again, I had a lot of fun with this book. I don't think it's his best. His best of the ones that I have still read is My Brother's Keeper, actually the Bronte book. That one's excellent. So Jordan, Nikki, if you guys haven't read that one's definitely worth having on your radar. But this one's definitely more of, like Jordan said, the action adventure novel. So I guess let's talk a little bit more in detail about the book in a spoiler way. What were parts that you guys liked that worked really well, or maybe since Jordan hasn't been able to get fully unchained here with his thoughts of maybe things that didn't work quite as much. What didn't work, and how long did it take you to figure out what was going on with William Ashbless?
Oh, so I can start on the William Ashbless thing. So the moment that Doyle was in that cafe waiting, and then was like, well, if you're not going to write the poem, I'm going to write the poem, the 12-hour night. I was like, okay. I think I see what's gonna happen. and then when he was, then after, of course, like his former grad student Steerforth is like this like hulking blonde man, and he meets him for a drink and learns that Steerforth has talked to Dogface Joe. Of like, I definitely see how this is gonna go. So that was a ton of fun. Jordan.
Sorry, I'm unmuting because I can hear you a little bit in the other room. I actually we were talking about Ashbless. I kind of thought it was interesting that Doyle accepts his fate as Ashbless rather than continue trying to return to the future. He chooses to stay in the past, live as Ashbless, let history unfold as it must, which, speaking to some of the things I know that you like, Sam, about this book, that's what a real history person, I think, would do. Someone who truly loves history as it is versus wanting to change history. I think there's something interesting and noble about that. And that sort of thing, finding peace and purpose in surrendering to a role that he was never thought that he would have to play or anything like that. I think some of the time travel stuff became even more interesting with Ashbless. This idea that Doyle actually has to try to remember Ashbless's works and write the works from memory that already exist, in his own time. So I think that there's some interesting time travel philosophy stuff there too. That's the classic ontological paradox.
Can I jump in on something there? So, as you mentioned, Doyle has to live out Ashbless's life. So Doyle knows when Ashbless is going to die and how Ashbless is going to die. And I'm going to just like cling on to the Dante's Inferno thing for a minute because, as you mentioned, Sam, like Tim Powers is just such a symbolic writer. And I feel like he must have been like, this has to have been like an inspiration in some sense. Okay. So Dante is in that time what was considered middle age, 35, going on his mission because like people live till 70, and Doyle is also 35 going on this mission and he's supposed to die at 70. And so I do feel like that was not accidental, and so he has to like face down his own death and like not mess with history because, as Jordan said, he is a historian and really reveres history and does not want to mess it up. He wants everything to carry forth the way it's supposed to.
Yeah, there's a real deterministic undercurrent to this. History must be preserved, and even free will often leads to these predestined outcomes, right? So Doyle is writing Ashbless's famous works from memory to maintain the illusion of Ashbless's existence.
Right.
He
Which
has
is just
to
him.
Yeah. And this is classic ontological paradox. The works have no origin except for the loop of Doyle writing what he read, which was written because he remembered it.
Right.
So I find all of that really interesting.
Yeah, and I think like one of the interesting things, and I'm going to credit the podcast. I don't know if you guys have listened to it, but I Might Believe in Fairies, which is looking at sci-fi and fantasy works from a Catholic perspective. I'm going to credit them with this because they did a discussion about the Anubis gates, and the host there, Aaron. Tim Powers is his favorite author, and so he's helped me understand Powers and the way he writes a little bit better. But one of the things that Aaron's pointed out is that in Powers' books, and the funny thing is, if you ever listen to Powers in interviews, I don't know if it's a shtick and he's playing it off, or if this is actually sincere. But whenever people point out like symbolism or were you like alluding to, like you mentioned Dante, or is this thing from the Bible, he's always like, oh, that's very interesting, huh? No, I was just trying to, it just worked for the story, so I put it that way. But they were pointing out, like in the Anubis gates, a lot of the significant dates that are spelled out, because this is set during a time and place in history, they're like, this happened on like September 22nd, correspond to very significant dates in like the Catholic Church. So either feast days or birthdays of saints or things like that. So the day when it's spelled out, when I think it's Byron, they make they make the duplicate of him. They do that specifically, and Byron asks like 2 times about what day it is, and they tell him, and it's a day in terms of the Catholic tradition, which I'm not Catholic, so sorry if I get this wrong. But in terms of their tradition, is like the birthday of these saints who are twins. And so it's sort of like an inversion of that. You frequently have in Tim Powers' books, but in the Anubis Gates as well, symbolism around the sacraments, either protecting the main character from the evil or thwarting the evil. At the very beginning, the sorcerers say, there's a mention to baptism, and one of them says like, oh, well, if you were baptized, like that would wreck the whole thing as far as our power goes of what we're trying to do here. You frequently have the main character escaping by being immersed in water and then being drawn out by somebody else, which 1 is an action trope, but 2, Powers is also using it in a symbolic way here, which is funny because Aaron pointed out in the podcast, and I hadn't even noticed this, that it's usually done when when Doyle is taking, as they would say, taking the Lord's name in vain. So he's invoking the name of God both as like him being frustrated by the situation and in desperation, but also it's almost like God hears and honors that as he's rescued out of the water frequently, and you can see baptism symbolism there. So there's interesting things like that I think are going on in this novel as well. Now I want to read Dante and reread this to see if Nikki might be right about that, because stuff like that is maybe not on the surface like, oh, there's like
so the
some
other
deep
thing I
things going
did
on
see
here.
when I looked into it, because like in the Inferno, Dante is encountered by three beasts. The first is incontinence, which is represented by the she-wolf. The second is violence or bestiality, which is represented by the lion. And the third is fraud or malice, which is represented by the leopard. And I think we can go and stretch and like try to make the connections and figure out like which stage in the book Doyle was going through these adventures. And no, we don't have a she-wolf, but we have a werewolf. Doyle kind of becomes a lion, right, with his big mane. And leopard, I couldn't figure out, but I tried to connect to leper. I was like,
Yeah.
maybe one of the cause.
Sure.
Or the old man. Well, who was,
Yeah, sorry, go for it, Jordan.
Oh, no, really quick point. I guess I would say this. I understand that, that Tim Powers is extremely symbolic. I was watching Philip Chase's last weekly update, and he mentioned both of us. And so, obviously, because we're doing a chat with him soon, and in that weekly update, he talked about the fact that he's enjoying Book of the New Sun. He's enjoying Gene Wolfe, but it's not going to be up there with his favorite fantasy. And he acknowledged that Wolfe is an extremely symbolic writer. And I acknowledge that too about Powers. That's fair enough. But as an English teacher, I will say this. I do often guard against the kind of literary analysis where we read through a text and we go, oh, look, that is like a metaphor for baptism. And that is a simile. And that word there actually has a double meaning. Oh, look, there's a garden. That's the Garden of Eden. And you can kind of like go through a work like Anubis Gates and go, ooh, that's that. And ooh, oh, cool. When Byron in real life had a doctor named Romanelli or something like that or whatever. So that was a connection that Nikki actually found, by the way. And then my question is, okay, well, what's the deeper significance? Well, you can make all of these connections and go, ooh, like that means that, and that means that. And you can have this, there's a guy who watches all of my videos and then like catalogs all of the references.
Mick Scarfield.
Oh yeah. And he's great.
It could be clinically diagnosed as a crazy person. I'm like, Matt, how do you do this? He'll be like,
it's incredible.
Every reference in the darkness that comes before. I'm like, what?
Yeah, sure. And I'm always impressed, and I always welcome him making those comments beneath my videos, because I'm just like, that is so cool. Who would not want to read through these little references? I love it. That said, the beginning and end of analysis can't end there. Like that, to actually have a discussion about the work, to find it meaningful, to find it to be deeply significant, to find purpose in it, there has to be more than just, ooh, I found a reference here. Ooh, there's one there. I can't just be whack-a-mole with the references. And so I saw a lot of the references, and then I said, okay, now what? So, and maybe you guys just didn't do that. You didn't have that reaction. You were like, no, actually the puzzle pieces are fitting together. That's how
Nikki,
I felt.
I've got some thoughts as far as the now what goes, but I'll let you go first if you have any thoughts on what Jordan said there.
You can go first.
All right. So here was, and once again, Jordan can say maybe I'm reading into ugly art and trying to make it beautiful just because of my love for the artist. But here was kind of my take on it. And maybe this is me taking things from outside the text and trying to put it on the text, but we'll give it a go here. The way I kind of saw it, first I'll say, Powers has said, I think it's either his favorite novel or the most influential novel on him is That Hideous Strength by C.S. Lewis, which I don't know if you guys have read That Hideous Strength or not, but if you haven't, like, everybody loves Narnia. That's fine. Narnia is okay. Narnia is good, even, I'll say. But Lewis's space trilogy, and especially That Hideous Strength, is like the best thing he ever wrote. It's brilliant.
I haven't read it, but I read a book by Sohrab Ahmari that I actually published a review of, and he spends an entire chapter talking about scientism and the idea that you can be that we ought to be ruled by rational like technocrats. He used that book as a way of dispelling that notion. His book is called The Unbroken Thread. He spends an entire chapter. So I have not read it, but I understand why. I know your reference, and I understand why it's really an important book.
Yeah, and if you know enough about it, you'll see That Hideous Strength all over like Tim Powers' work in general, but especially this one where you have and I won't go into That Hideous Strength. I'll just put that out there. But you have like these sorcerers who are trying to access a power that they don't realize what it is. It backfires on them, and then we have good people who are trying to pick up the pieces and prevent more damage from being done. So I took this as sort of Doyle is almost like a almost a saint figure, or a figure that's almost like God's chosen one in this story, where he's a person who's out of time, like he's literally not in this time and place, must be taken from a separate time, and then he is somebody who is at the beginning of the story kind of a, I don't know, a, how would you say it, a milksop, a wimp, like not much of anything remarkable, just kind of a unassuming professor who is a big fan of the romantic poets, and not just of their work but also of like their ideals and what they represent, and throughout the story is transformed from being that wimpy, shrimpish character into being that ideal, but also literally by the end of the story is literally one of the romantic poets. I mean, a fictionalized one, but still, like, he is transformed into the thing that he's always idolized. And by the end of it, like, it sort of ends with almost like a Pirates of the Caribbean type of ending, where you've got him like looking off into the sunset. What swashbuckling adventure shall we go on next? And
Yeah.
so I saw some of this symbolism not just as like, oh, and now we're putting in symbolism because it's fun, but it's symbolic of the transformation that he's going through from the wimpy type character that he begins as into the heroic figure by the end. Yeah, Nikki.
The thing that bugged me with Doyle, though, like as you said, like he's very wimpy in the beginning, and things are just happening to him, and he's just getting beaten down and destroyed. And then it seems like he starts to come around and get a little stronger and rise back up. But then when they're in Egypt and he's pretending, he's begging again and pretending to be a mute, it's like, I thought you got over this. Like where he has to be like rescued and things are just happening to him again. And that really hurt that progression for me.
Well, that's funny you mentioned. So that didn't bug me. I don't know why, but that didn't bug me. But that was actually one of the points that I used, sort of like with my theory about him being God's servant, is that in Egypt, one of the other Muslim characters is like, "Oh, don't mess with him. Don't you know that like beggars are like specifically like chosen by Allah, or specifically called out by God?" I forget I should have marked the phrasing of it, but that specifically, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." So, I don't know, Jordan, am I grasping at straws here to justify my reading of a book? What do you think?
No, I think that everything you said can be true, and it can still not be a good book. So like when I approached this book in the beginning, I said to myself, the subject matter this book is exploring is fantastic. And then as I read the book, and I'm into those themes and ideas and cross genre exploration. I'm into all the stuff that he's trying to do. And then as I'm reading the book, I'm seeing the symbolism, and the point that you made there is a fantastic one. And I'm seeing that kind of thing. And I can still be reading a book and saying this book needs to be changed in order to really deliver. So I'm liking the topic, I'm liking the symbolism, I'm liking the genre explorations he's doing, I'm liking the intellectual history that he is highlighting. But for me, it was the execution, and the sense in which I felt that this was an unbalanced, lopsided book that was 90% action. I didn't like Doyle ever throughout the book as a main character. I always thought that he was whiny. I never liked him, and that's okay. You don't have to like the main character, but outside of Doyle, I wasn't even sure that I knew anyone else. There weren't even really any great secondary characters whose motivations I really understood. I thought it had a convoluted plot.
Likable character.
Who?
I do. I think there was one. I think Chinny was a very likable character. The sword fighter who got his athletic young body taken away, and he gets placed in Doyle's decrepit body with like one ear, and he's at the bottom of the Thames, and he has to fight his way up to survive. And then he realizes he's like this like withered, broken guy, and he still finds himself a job at a bakery, and he's still jogging around trying to make the most of it, and he still has hope that like he can get his body back. Like he's like a hero kind of figure in my mind, kind of like the traditional hero. But I feel like he was probably the most like straight up kind of good character in like the traditional fantasy sense.
Yeah, and even things like that, if you're going to do it, that was such a quick minor blip on the overall story. For me, this is just for me. I'm not insulting anyone who likes this book. It just didn't work for me, and there's a tendency that I think causes people to give 5 stars to a book like this. And I know I'm kind of psychologizing and mind reading a little bit here, but I think I have ample evidence for this phenomenon. There are a lot of people who know they want to like certain authors. I remember I was chatting with Christopher Rocchio, and I'll never forget him saying this to me. He told me that he knew he loved Gene Wolfe as an author before he'd even read Gene Wolfe. And again, Christopher and I agree on 98% of things in general, and he's one of my closest friends. And so I say this with all the love in the world, but that's kind of a problem for me. Christopher had decided that he loved Wolfe because Wolfe is a Catholic. Wolfe shares Christopher's worldview. Wolfe writes in the genre that Christopher tends to enjoy. Wolfe is an intellectual, and he's difficult, which makes him inaccessible to the broad public. And so he knew going in that he had to like Wolfe's writing. Now, as it happens, Christopher's right. Wolfe is a genius, and he's right to love Gene Wolfe. That said, I'll never forget that he said that, because it explains to me why someone essentially would do the same thing with this book. And I know about this psychological tendency because it lives within me as well. I wanted to love this. I love Indiana Jones. I love all the mummy element. I love time travel stories. I love the romantic poets. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is on the book jacket blurb. I thought this was going to be all about Coleridge. This is about a literary scholar who's obsessed with the romantic poets, and he's traveling back in time to meet them. That is so cool, but he's being tricked by these sorcerers who are trying to resurrect these Egyptian gods. I love that. So there's all this stuff going on that I like. So this book is right up my alley in a sense. That said, if you write a story about all of that cool stuff I love and it's not good, and you don't know how to do it well, I'm not going to pretend to others or lie to myself that I like it. I'm not going to engage in that kind of confirmation bias. And I know that's not what you're doing, and that's not what you're doing, Nikki, and that's not what Christopher's doing when he reads Gene Wolfe. It's just that I do think that there are a lot of people who give this 5 stars and go, this is a great book, when I'm like, this has an extremely convoluted plot. I had to concentrate super carefully to avoid constantly being confused. I felt that it was 90% action, super frenetic. There's just so much chaos and mayhem going on at all times. It was exhausting to read. It felt like, after a while, it seemed like the author was a juggler with too many balls in the air. And there were some moments when I was actually just genuinely confused about what was happening, and I was not willing to put in the mental energy to figure out what was going on. So I said I wouldn't be negative, and here a grump, and here I am being a total grump. I just don't understand how this got through the editors, because it's 90% action, and it's just he's doing this and he's going here and he's doing this. I don't know if you noticed, but so many of the sentences were list sentences. He did this, then he did this, then he did this, and then he did this. And he repeats it in this book about 1,000 times. It almost seemed like I had such a hard time with it, guys. And I'll make one last point because I know I'm making Sam extremely angry here, and I apologize. I'm going to make a silly reference here to Larry Correia's Monster Hunter book. Okay, that Monster Hunter book is meant to be a fun book where it's like Men in Black meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer meets Supernatural. It's, a guy who's an accountant who gets roped into fighting monsters for this secret organization. And the cool thing about it is that when he learns that there are monsters in the world, he's freaked out by it and he doesn't know what to make of it. And you get halfway through the book and he still does not know what to make of the fact that there are werewolves and what to do with that knowledge. And it seems like everyone just adjusts in this book, like immediately. Like you go back in time, you're like, wow, we're back in time. That's really interesting. Hi, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And you just start chatting with him like you're with a normal guy at a bar. And then like all the stuff that's happening is it's just no one's second guessing it. I don't know.
So all right, I'm going to push back on that a little because one, Doyle did just travel through time. So he did an unbelievable thing. And so I think would be a little bit more accepting of unbelievable things continuing to go on and happen. Like, okay, this is just what it is. And also at the beginning in the prologue, it takes place like in the early 1800s, like 1802, something like that. And they're talking about how magic isn't as strong anymore because as you start to get more into modern times, the modernism and the technology, and I think the expansion of communication and everything makes it much tougher for magic to exist in its strong form, for people to hold those beliefs. And the further back you go in time, like when they go back to the 1680s, there's that brotherhood who's still like actually operating as the brotherhood, like trying to protect the world from that magic. And you get the sense that people have more of those like supernatural kind of paganistic beliefs the further back you go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you definitely get that sense. I will say it's brave of Jordan to publicly call Nikki and I shills and Christopher Rocchio a hack.
You are not. You are
here,
not.
So.
You are absolutely not. Christopher isn't a hack. You guys aren't shills. I just think you guys are confused. And I understand how patronizing that might sound. But I think you make a good point. That's a fair point, Nikki. That said, as I was reading about this, I was thinking about Thomas Sowell's book, The Unconstrained Vision. And in that book, classic book, and he talks about these two visions of the world. And there's the unconstrained vision and there's the constrained vision. There's the unconstrained vision where everything goes, everything's open, we tolerate everything. It's this kind of like the Romantics ideology. Actually, he's kind of criticizing the Romantic ideology. We're all oppressed. We can just throw out the old calendar, start over from scratch, and we'll build this utopia. He calls that the unconstrained vision. And then there's the constrained vision where we understand what works. We understand that there are limits on human nature. This is the novel version of Sowell's unconstrained vision. It was just everything exploding all the time. I was telling Nikki, because I was watching Men in Black 2. I don't know why it got me in the mood for it, but I put on Men in Black 2. And there is a giant snake chasing a subway car in that movie. And they are battling a giant lizard woman in Central Park. And there are all these people around who can see it happening. And there's no way to cover this up. And yet the movie just goes on as if Men in Black can remain secret. And it's not going to be in all the papers the next day. And they can just use that little thing to wipe the memory of everyone in New York City. And it's just so ridiculous. And when I was reading this book, I constantly felt like that. There's just so much going on. They're having battles in broad daylight in the middle of the street, and they're using magic, and there's charms and death spells, and all this stuff that at this point. It was just too much. It was too much for me. the blind dwarves and the clowns on stilts and the guy wearing the spring shoes and the con man beggar gang.
Can we talk about the shoes for a second? Because this bothered me a little. So I understand that they were using more like aerial magic and that the earth magic weakened them, so they're trying to limit contact time with the earth. But okay, I can kind of see that with spring shoes because you're bouncing. You're like you're in contact with the earth less. But on stilts, you're still like, is he looking at like maybe that like wood is not as conductive as like a metal or something else, but because like with Harbin on the stilts, his foot is in contact with the stilts, which is in contact with the earth, full contact. Like I just was a little confused with that, because then when Doyle takes the chain and the chain is always in contact with the ground to kind of like be in touch with the earth, I'm like, well, their shoes are still touching the earth, but I guess his chain was touching his foot. I don't know. I don't know.
What I didn't
understand
was the clown's father, who recruited healthy people, then altered them for the trade of begging, which is worth all of that work. His hospital in reverse, under London somewhere, developing techniques to turn normal people and to tailor them to evoke horror and pity so that they can become a beggar army for him. What the hell's going on? Why is that happening?
Maybe I misread it. I always saw it as like, kidnapping and brainwashing people rather than like, oh, these people want to be, surgically altered to be.
Not that they want to be surgically altered, but how it's even worth doing. What's the point? What was the point of all of that? And just the unconstrained. Huh?
He's sick and twisted.
And so his like sick project is that's his sick project.
Have you never seen like Jordan's cracking me up here. Have you ever seen like people with like evil minions, Jordan? Like, having all your little creepy little henchmen, that's what this guy
homeless army, an army of homeless.
It costs too much to buy them homes. So
bedraggled, like, messed up looking. Just I can't pretend like I understand it.
I think I'll say this, like Powers, kind of like Wolf, although like less so, like will get confusing even in Stress of Her Regard. There's parts, especially as you get to the end of it, where you really have to stop and be like, what? Like, because he, and I think a part of it, maybe he gets in his own head. I don't know. I don't mean to psychoanalyze the guy, but that's why actually My Brother's Keeper, that's one of the reasons why I think it's the best, is because it executes a lot of Powers' ideas, but does it in a very clear way, especially at the end. Like, that is the book of his that I was confused the least, where I was like, oh, yep, I've got all my ducks in a row. Everything makes sense. And this is definitely the novel where there was the most confusion. And so, Jordan, maybe you're right. Maybe that's a failing on Powers' part. But there were parts of it where I felt like I could be confused right now if I give this 60-70%. So like the sequence where you've got the werewolf who's like switching bodies with people, and you're trying to figure out like, wait, who is in whose body? And this is Doyle, but he's in somebody else's body. And how is this going on? In a sequence like that, I remember distinctly thinking, like, if I tune out even for a little bit, I'm going to be lost. So like stay perfectly dialed in so that, and maybe this is just an illusion, but my suspicion is that in spots where I was confused, that was more on me than it was on him. And maybe I'm giving him too much grace here, but that was at least my experience
something
with it.
I noticed that I think were some mistakes that bugged me. So every time there's like a star, you change character perspective, was my understanding of it. But sometimes it didn't feel like you were entirely with that character. And so, for example, Doyle would sometimes be thinking of Jackie as he, and then sometimes be thinking of Jackie as she, even though he doesn't know Jackie's a she. And that was driving me nuts. I was like, no, but we're supposed to be in Doyle's head. Use the right pronoun. So that was like, it's like that took me out sometimes. And then when he was in the boat with Jackie in the Thames and Doyle shouted at her to step on it, I'm like, would she even understand what step on it is? There's no cars at that time. There's no like step on the gas. So that was a little bizarre. Like, so there are like a few things that sometimes took me out of it.
For me, it was the bigger thing of the lack. This could have been a good book. but it's the way that it was written for me. I was on Goodreads, and when I finished and I gave that rating that Nikki gave it a 4, I gave it a 2. So we gave it a 3. And then you sent me that message being you making fun of me for our rating. I'm scrolling Goodreads, and I actually looked at one of the first ones that came up was Josh from Red Fury Books. And he said, I found this one interminable. The pace was exhausting and it jumped around from character to character, never building momentum. And I totally agree with that. But I would also add, he's missing that what Ursula Le Guin calls stress and release pattern in writing. That you can't always be on the run in a novel. A novel cannot be 90% action. And we're talking about a novel that consists of describing how characters are moving just for 90% of the novel. I can't.
It's like the show The 100. That's an exhausting show.
It comes down to that's it.
There's no release. It's all stress all the time.
All stress all the time. One of the Goodreads comments was that she had never felt so liberated after closing a book before. And I felt the exact same way. I felt like I was trapped in a prison. And then when I closed the book, I was like, oh, freedom. And
but he was trying to do that, Jordan. He was taking you through hell. That is my theory.
Okay. And Duchamp's Urinal is a masterpiece because...
So Jordan, let me ask you this. So when you read a book like, we'll take an example that both of us have read. When you read something like Kingdoms of Death, by Rocchio, where a not insubstantial amount of the book is just about the agony and torture that the main character is going through, are you saying that you want to read a book like that and be like, gosh darn, this is so entertaining. Nikki, give me another bowl of popcorn. This is so much fun to read. Or do you think that it should be something that's like, because it's something that's hard for the character going on, that it also is hard as a reader to get through it too?
I mean, I think Christopher is like a master at avoiding what the kind of problems that Powers suffers from. Kingdoms of Death is not entirely him, being tortured by the Cielsen or whatever. It is, I mean, in terms of time span maybe, but that book begins with classic sci-fi action. There's a military operation going on, and then there's all sorts of intrigue, and there's, you've got a nice mix of action, you've got a nice mix of philosophy and reflection and torture and dialogue. This was just breakneck speed, nonstop action, and I almost feel like you have to earn the action that you do. It's got to be, again, I'm the guy that said on Christopher's channel that I want in my speculative fiction a world worth saving. You have to explain to me why I should care. And I found myself just like I'm above them, watching them act. It just felt
like the Punch and Judy show that they talked about.
Oh God. Yeah, there was the Punch and Judy show too, but even the way that every single thing was written, it was just characters' movements. And what else can I say? I'm sorry. I wish I had better news for you, buddy.
That's all right.
I'm letting you down. I know I'm letting you down.
But Jordan, don't you feel like you made it through something?
Yeah,
it's important.
In the same way that, like, if I crash my car, I will have made it through something. And if I live.
So here's the new rating scale. Did I like Tim Powers more than I liked crashing my car? Yes, that's the new scale we're going with. No, I hear what you're saying, Jordan, and I don't even necessarily disagree with anything that you've said. I think for me, like, I had, and I know you're gonna roll your eyes when I say this, but I had a lot of fun reading this book as much as I have reading almost anything by Tim Powers. But this one is not going to stick with me as long as My Brother's Keeper or Stress of Her Regard or even Alternate Routes, which is generally considered C-tier Tim Powers. Even that, I think, is probably more thoughtful, more will give you more to chew on than this one. I thought this one was really interesting, but a lot of the themes are sort of like pulling themes out of, oh geez, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, where there's actually some like deep stuff going on in Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think, but it's nothing where you're going to actually sit down and be like, man, you know that conversation between Indiana Jones and Marion, that was so deep, wasn't it? Like, no, it's all almost secondary to that.
Well, there were some great twists in this book. I will give it another compliment. I thought there were some really good twists. He's good at setting those up. He clearly outlined this in a way, at least, where there's the Ash Bless twist. There's I guess you could call it a twist, discovering that Dog-Faced Joe is a body thief. The Dr. Romani Fakea twist. The Doyle's body being stolen by Dog-Faced Joe, the Jackie twist, the whole thing with the Egyptian gods being constructs. There's a lot of really good twists. So that kind of kept me going, because I could have just DNF'd this. I've seen Mike show up to book chats and he's like, yeah, I DNF'd it after 50 pages. So I'm here to just rain on your fun. And I could have done that, but there was something that kept me going through all the way through. And
maybe I should have said this earlier, but as a new son, and maybe this is spoiling part of Book of the New Sun, so this is probably a small spoiler for it. But one of the things that I loved about this, like a lot, was that question of like free will and determinism playing out through the plot. So one of the big things that you don't realize until later in Book of the New Sun is that Severian is traveling through a world that he has already impacted in the future. And because of weird time stuff, he doesn't realize that there are characters and historical names that he is hearing that are actually him, but in the future. And now we've circled back around. And so he doesn't know that. And so that interplay, and so like that, even that element and reckoning with that, and that there's, how would you say this? Things behind the curtain that are pulling Severian's strings throughout the book that he doesn't realize are going on. Like all of that, there's similar things that Tim Powers is doing here with, Ash Bless not wanting to change the future, but also trying to figure out how much agency he has within what is known about Ash Bless and what's still a mystery and where he does have that freedom. And the fact that he's playing out the history that he's always revered. Like even just that idea gave me a lot of momentum going through the book. So maybe I'm cutting it too much slack just because of that. But that was like one of the key things that I always was like, oh, that's so cool.
And I'll be humble and admit maybe part of the anger, because it was real anger reading this at some points, maybe part of how negative, maybe I would have given it a 3 out of 5. Part of what I felt and didn't like about it was that I was going in expecting one thing, and that rug I felt was pulled out from under me, not only with what I thought this book was going to be about and explore, the intellectual history that I thought I was going to get, the Samuel Taylor Coleridge and Byron stuff that I thought I was going to get to explore, and which I didn't. And then it was replaced by clowns and homeless people chasing each other in the streets. And so I think that's part of what it was, is if I think a lot of how we rate a book or determine, a lot of how we ascertain a book's quality in terms of how we would rate it, our standards, has to do with what we're expecting going in, if we're being honest.
Stress Deferred Regard was my first Tim Powers book that I read, and I had some very specific ideas and wants going into that book, which it was very different from what I expected being Tim Powers. And so that's one that I do want to reread now, kind of knowing what to expect and the kinds of things to look out for more, to like really truly appreciate it. I think I appreciated it less than I would have if I knew a little bit more about Tim Powers going in. So yeah, similar.
In sort of landing the plane here, as far as the discussion goes, if you guys have anything else to share, that's totally fine. Oh, I just noticed this on my notes here. Just speaking of like the symbolism stuff, this was pointed out on the I Might Believe in Fairies podcast. Like when I'm talking about like this isn't an accident. Like Tim Powers might say it's an accident, but it can't be. Like the day of that. Ash Bless meets his Ka and kills him and is finally free from this determinism that has been holding him the entire story is Easter of that year. So like you want to talk about like Catholic liturgical symbols going on here, like, well, like that's it right there. But if you guys have any more thoughts, definitely, this is sort of the time for concluding thoughts. But I guess I'll sort of start that by saying, Jordan, would you be interested in reading more Tim Powers, or do you think this is it? And do you think people will enjoy this book or Powers in general? Actually, this is a good question for both of you. If they know more about the history, or is it more frustrating if you know more about it and you're looking for things and then you're not getting it?
That's a really good question because it's funny. I was watching I saw a conversation between, I think it was Mike and Brian Bell and Philip and I forget someone else
John
about
Mitten.
who?
It was John Mitten from
John
Story.
Mitten.
Yeah.
From so about stress of her regard. And I before they even had that discussion and they posted it, I was thinking this is interesting because I knew in advance that Mike wasn't going to like it. I've never even read the book, and I knew that Mike wasn't going to like it because, again, a lot of this stuff is, and I think this is the bind that Powers has himself in, which is, boy, are you going to be frustrated. So I'll tell you, Sam, the first 3 chapters of this book were great, I thought, Anubis Gates. So that might tell you how, to some degree, how I feel. I was so impressed with it. Do you remember I texted you and I said, this is right up my alley. This is perfect. It's not only right up my alley. I would live in the dumpster in that alley. I said, this is incredible. This is going to be my favorite book. And so I gave the prologue like A+. Then chapter 1, I'm like, okay, A. Then chapter 2, A-. And then it started going downhill from there. And but anyways, back to the stress of her regard. I'm like, if this is going to be all about making meaningful connections about Byron and Shelley, Mary Shelley, whatever. I haven't read the book. I think Mike's going to be frustrated, and I think someone who doesn't know anything about the Romantic poets, or let's say Milton, is going to be rolling their eyes, is going to be bored for the first 3 chapters of this book.
Mm-hmm.
So to your first question, I would read another Tim Powers book. I would read Stress of Her Regard. I would read some of his other work, especially if it gets better than this or if it's different than this. Yeah, I would say you're going to have a hard time with Powers if you don't know the intellectual references, but you're also going to have a hard time with him if you don't like action, or I see action as a means to an end. I don't want the whole book to be action. So I'll leave it there. I've bashed on this book enough.
Nikki, what do you think? Would you read? Are you planning on reading more Powers? What do you think about the history stuff here?
Yeah, I'm definitely planning on reading more Powers. For the history stuff with Anubis Gates specifically, I don't think you have to be that interested in the Romantics or certain historical periods to like get into it. And I don't think it would necessarily help to know a lot about that stuff because you might be expecting more of it in the books and be let down. So I think for Anubis Gates specifically, if you like action, whether you're into history or not, it might be a good fit.
Yeah, no, those are definitely good thoughts all around. I think for me, like the funny thing is, I don't know, I'm not well read in the Romantics by any means, but I've read Andrew Clavin's book on them, so it's like, okay, I've got that much understanding, so I at least have a background. I know the names Byron, Wordsworth, Coleridge. I know a bit about their relationship with each other.
Good book, by the way. I read that too.
Excellent book. Yeah, very, very good. As is, Jordan, this is what we really should have done. We should have had like the Andrew Clavin fan club, because I've read almost every novel he's written at this point, so we could just start back at the beginning and reread them. There's a guy who does action very, very well.
Yeah,
but I digress. With the Anubis Gates, though, I think, or with his books in general, like I'm not well read in the history, and I know almost nothing about the Brontes with My Brother's Keeper. And maybe this is just a testament to how good that book is. I've never read, to my shame, any of the books written by the Brontes, and I don't know much about their history. And I enjoyed that one even more than the books that I did know a bit about the history. So I'm and maybe I'll figure this out more as I do more reading of Tim Powers, but I wonder how necessary the history context is. With Stress of Her Regard, that's a really weird book. I get why Christopher likes it, but I don't know, now that I've read a bit more Powers, I don't know if it's the best place for somebody like Mike or Brian Bell to start there, if they're wanting to like his stuff.
Yeah, Nikki said it. I couldn't have said it better than what she just said, which was, you said that you actually might not want to make a big deal out of at least for this book, you might not want to make too big of a deal of the intellectual history stuff because it's not really in there that much, and you're going to turn them off, and they're going to think that it's going to be like that the whole time. I actually preserved in my notes a quote of from chapter 2, and I was like, oh, this book is the best. And it was when they got into the bar with Coleridge, and Coleridge says, the entire tone of English literature was altered, dropped into a minor and somber key at the accession of Cromwell's Parliament party, when the popularly styled Roundhead succeeded despite the divine right of kings in the beheading of Charles I. The Athenian splendors of Elizabeth's reign, or rather her age, for her years embraced a combined glory of all disciplines that our nation has not at any other time seen, gave way to the austerity of the Puritans, who issued alike the extravagances and bright insights of their historical predecessors. Now Milton, and he goes on and on about Milton, being a liberal Puritan, and then it kind of stops there, and we never get that again. Mm-hmm. And I was like, this is going to be fun. We're gonna follow Coleridge around, and it's going to be Doyle, the scholar from the future, and Coleridge is going to invite him to a seance, and Coleridge is going to be all wrapped up in the attempt to resurrect the gods, and Doyle's eventually going to want to stop that from happening, and there's going to be this rift, and then they're going to go back to Milton's time and talk to him, and the whole time is going to be laced with intellectual discussions about, and that, I guess, so a big part of this is that's why I was frustrated. And so maybe someone like Mike or whatever would actually like a book like this better. He might roll his eyes at the part that I just read, but he might like the rest of the book.
Well, I'm literally, once I finish up the book I'm going through now, the next book I'm going through is Declare by Tim Powers, which is his pastiche of John le Carré and Jason Bourne novels fighting, I guess, demons and maybe Genie, and I'm not sure. So you'll have to subscribe, like and subscribe for more if you want to find out what I think of that. So anyway, I don't know if you guys have any concluding thoughts, but I think we're about ready to land the plane here. Anything else, Jordan or Nikki?
Nope, my computer's threatening me that it's going to shut itself off in a minute, so right. This is probably a good time.
Well, thank you to anyone who's watched this far. I do hope more people at least try Tim Powers, if not this book, and maybe I should have said this during the spoiler-free section, because everyone who's this far either has read him or doesn't care. Because I do think he does weird fiction type things like Stephen King, like Wolfe, very, very well, and more accessibly than Wolfe, and certainly much better than King, at least in my opinion.
Okay. I'll say at the end here, don't be afraid of subscribing to my channel. I am not usually this negative. In fact, if you look through my catalog of videos that I've made, they're almost all glowingly positive. And when I read a book that I don't like, I actually never review it. So you'll see, like, the only kind of review I'll do is if I gave it more than a 6 out of 10 or whatever, or a 3 out of 5 or whatever. So I am not usually this negative, and I apologize for how negative I was. And I don't like being this way, but I felt an obligation. I wouldn't have reviewed this book.
There might be a Stephen King rant somewhere on our channel.
There's a Stephen King rant about how I didn't like the second half of it for the same reason I didn't like this book, actually. It was just mayhem the entire time. But I'll just say to the viewers out there, I apologize for being this negative. If this were a normal book review, I wouldn't have even done it. But I felt an obligation, because I love Sam so much, to show up and at least put the effort in to talk about it. So I'm sorry.
Well, Jordan, we're glad you're here. Seriously, I'm glad you at least read Tim Powers, because it's like pulling teeth trying to get people on Fantasy BookTube to read a book that's not by John Gwynne Sanderson or Steven Erikson. So I'm glad I finally got somebody to read Powers with me. And then Nikki's been holding down the fort for years since I got here, as far as Powers goes. So, well, Jordan, do you want to? I don't know if you're wanting to announce this publicly, but what we're going to be reading next together.
Oh, we'll be reading Pillars of the Earth, but you actually, Sam, should announce it because I don't know anything about it, and this one was one that you recommended, and so I'm assuming you're not going to let me down again with your choice of books. No, I'm just kidding. Why don't you announce it?
Yeah, so Jordan and I have been going back, like, oh, we should read books at least periodically. Son of the Black Sword now, the mid-Anubis Gates, as Jordan will call it from now on. And then we threw out some suggestions of ideas, and one that he liked that I'd thrown out was Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, which is obviously, I mean, one of the top 3 most famous historical fiction books ever written. And about all I know about it is that it's about building a church over like 70 years, and frequently people who read it say it's their favorite book of all time, which is quite the statement. So I'm not necessarily expecting it to become that, but I'm hoping to at least really enjoy it.
I'm so excited, and
all
everyone I know likes this book.
Pages. So
this book is like not polarizing. Everyone that I know and respect on BookTube and teachers I know just say this book is just brilliant. Actually, I believe, Nikki, that your dad liked this book as well. And so this is a really special book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in to watch this. Thank you so much to Jordan and Nikki for giving me part of your morning to talk about Tim Powers. Everyone who hasn't should go subscribe to iWizard, twice the wizards, twice the fun. And yeah, I don't know if you guys are pitching your book yet or not, but I'm sure you'll get all the updates on their exciting new fantasy novel that they're writing if you subscribe to their channel. So
thanks, Sam. This was fun. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you everyone for watching. Take care.
Bye.